Girivaradari Yashodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yashodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajak Acharya Ashtatara Shata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajak Acharya Ashtatara Shata Shri Srimad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Primsekaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakun Radhakun Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Navadvip Dham Ki Jai Mathura Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulasi Devi Ki Jai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, the cosmic manifestation. Chapter 1, the first step in God realization. Text 32. Chandamsi Anantasya Shiro Grinanti Damshra Yama Sneha Kala Dvijani.
We did that one yesterday.
Okay. So text 32. Oh, sorry, I was just looking in the wrong spot. Vrido Taro Shto Dada Eva Lobo Dharma Stano Sya Prishtam Kas Tasya Midra Cha Kukshihi Samudra Girayo Sti Sangaha Ridotaros Dara Ridotarastro Dara Eva Lobo
Idotarasto Daraiva Lobo Dharmastano Dharma Pato Shapashtam Astasya Medram Vishano Chamitro
Girayosti Sangaha
Akshi Samudra Girayosti Sangaha
Ridotarosto Dara Eva Lobo
Idotarasto Daraiva Lobo
Dharmastano Dharma Patosya Prishtam
Dharmastano Dharma Pato Shapashtam
Kastasya Medram Rishano Chamitro
Kastasya Mitram Vishnu Samitra
Kukshi Samudra Girayosti Sangaha
Ukshi Samudra Girayosti Sangha
Ridotarosto Dara Eva Lobo
Hridotarasto Varaiva Lobo
Dharmastano Dharma Patosya Prishtam
Dhamastano Dharma Patosya Prishtam
Kastasya Medram Vishrano Chamitro
Tasya Mitram Vishnu Samitra
Kukshi Samudra Girayosti Sangaha
Ukshi Samudra Girayosti Sangha Hridotarasto Varaiva Lobo Dharmastano Dharma Patosya Prishtam Kastasya Medram Vishnu Chamitro Kukshi Samudra Girayosti Sangha
Ridotarashto Dhara Eva Lobho Dharmastano Dharma Patosya Prishtam Kastasya Medram Vishnu Chamitro Kukshi Samudra Girayosti Sangha
Vidotarasto Dara Eva Lobo Dharmastano Dharma Patosya Prishtam Austasya Medram Vishano Chamitro Ukshi Samudra Girayosti Sangha
Vidotarasto Dharaheva Lobho Dharmastana Dharma Patosya Prishtam Kastasya Metram Vishanucha Kastasya Metram Vishananucha Mitro Ukshi Samudra Girayosti Sangha.
Rito tarosto tara eva lopo. Dharmastano dharma patosya prishtam. Kastasya mitram vrishano cha mitro. Kukshi samudra girayosti sangha.
Vrido tarasto darahe valobho. Dharma stano dharma patosya prishtam. Astasya medram vrishnau cha mitrau. Kukshis samudra girayosti sangaha.
Rito tarasto dara eva lopo. Dharma stano dharma patosya prishtam. Kastasya medrang vishano cha mitro. Kukshi samudra girayosti sangha.
Vrida, modesty. Uttara, upper. Oshta, lip. Adhara, chin. Eva, certainly. Lobha, hankering. Dharma, religion. Stanaha, breast. Adharma, irreligion. Pataha, way. Asya, his. Prishtam, back. Kaha, Brahma. Tasya, his. Medram, genitals. Vrishano, testicles. Cha, also. Mitro, the Mitra Varunas. Kukshi, waist. Samudraha, the oceans. Girayaha, the hills. Asti, bones. Sangaha, stack. Translation. Modesty is the upper portion of his lips. Hankering is his chin. Religion is the breast of the Lord. And irreligion is his back. Brahmaji, who generates all living beings in the material world, is his genitals, and the Mitra Varunas are his two testicles. The ocean is his waist, and the hills and mountains are the stacks of his bones. Purport. The Supreme Lord is not impersonal, as misconceived by less intelligent thinkers. Rather, he is the Supreme Person, as confirmed in all authentic Vedic literatures. But his personality is different from what we can conceive. It is stated here that Brahmaji acts as his genitals and that the Mitra Varunas are his two testicles. This means that as a person, he is complete with all bodily organs, but they are of different types with different potencies. When the Lord is described as impersonal, therefore, it should be understood that his personality is not exactly the type of personality found within our imperfect speculation. One can, however, worship the Lord even by seeing the hills and mountains, or the ocean and the sky as different parts and parcels of the gigantic body of the Lord, the Virat Purusha. The Virat Rupa, as exhibited by Lord Krishna to Arjuna, is a challenge to the unbelievers. Om Jnana Tamarandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Prijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gourangi, Radhe Vrindavaneshwari, Vrishabhanu Sute Devi, Pranamami Hadipriye, Panchakalpatarubhyascha, Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha, Patitanam Bhavanebhyo, Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhara, Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Challenge is to the non-believers. When one begins to inquire into the Vedic knowledge, the spiritual master, the teacher, asks the student to try to imagine something or understand something that is normally not understood. The student normally would not think that way. But the teacher teaches him how to think differently, how to approach a very difficult subject. So the idea that the absolute truth is a person is easy for one who is willing to take the training. For example, if you tell a child that now imagine these big mountains and just imagine how big these mountains are, and if that's the stacks of his bones. A person, a very big person, had mountains for bones. And they'll think, oh, vast, huge person. But the impersonalists, they prefer not to open their minds to the Vedic information, which is given by top authority, Supreme Personality of Godhead. Instead, they prefer to allow their own minds to speculate. And they say, how could these be bones of a person? We've never seen any person so big. And how could you have mountains for bones anyway? But the bones that we have in our bodies, they're also made of the same bone-like, stone-like substance. The earth combined with fire and water and air and ether comes together, makes bones or stones. So one has to be open to learning something new. If we just rely on our own experience, it's so limited. For example, to an ant, he cannot imagine that if he's walking on someone's toe, he can't imagine this is a person. He may know why it's moving, but he won't be able to guess because his intelligence is limited. So he doesn't consider this thing is alive. It's because of his poor fund of knowledge, poor intelligence. And those with the poor fund of knowledge and are not willing to learn, they won't be able to understand how Supreme could be so big that he could have his head in the upper planetary systems of the universe and his feet could be in the bottom. We've never seen anyone so big. That's the difference between God and the absolute truth and all others, is that he acts wonderfully. Have you ever heard of a dwarf putting a hole in the top of the universe? It's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. If he's a dwarf, he is not very tall. But the Lord, just to make his point explicit, he came as a dwarf, and then the King Bali, who was managing the universe at that time, wanted to give some benediction, some gift to the dwarf Brahmin, because Brahmins should be given charity by the kings. The king said, go ahead, choose whatever you'd like. And he, dwarf Brahmin said, just give me 3 steps of land. And Bali Maharaj said, but your feet are so small, your legs are so small. How big of steps can you take? Better you ask for something more. Anyway, there was a long discussion. And Vaman said, I only need 3 steps of land. So he covered with 1 step, he covered the top portion of the universe. The other step, he covered the lower half. 2 steps was sufficient. So this is the non-devotees, the impersonalists or voidists, they won't believe that such a person exists that he could cover the universe in 2 steps. But why not? Like compared to the ant or the even smaller little germ, this human body appears like a universe, thousands of times greater than his size. So if that can be a universe for those in the body of germs, then those in the body of humans can also see the universe as the body of the Lord. And this is the challenge to the impersonalists and to the speculators, to the voidists, who don't want to accept God as being a person. And the first step in God realization, this portion we're reading now, is to help them to begin to understand how the Lord can be a person. Personal view of the universe, personal view of nature. Generally, people think of nature as being impersonal. But we can see nature in a personal way. The sun is as we've been hearing, the sun is the eye of the Lord. The upper lip is his modesty. Hankering is his chin. Hankering is his chin. Religion is the rest. We can see everything in that way, in a personal way. When someone has love for another person, that whatever he sees, or whatever she sees, reminds them of that person, and they think how this person has beautiful face, and they give some description like a flower. They give the name of a flower sometimes to a person because they have a bright face, bright. So this is the challenge, to get free from our ignorance, come out of the darkness, tamasima jyotirgama, and come into the light of transcendental knowledge. Means one has to be open to consider something that they haven't considered before, to go beyond. And that is, everyone needs a guru for that. We need a teacher. It's beyond our ability to imagine.
Thank you, Maharaj. 2 days ago in Whole Foods, we spoke with someone who had this impersonal conception or misconception where they were saying, I am very satisfied in my relationship with the Supreme, but I know that this Supreme Being has no form, is impersonal, and doesn't have likes or dislikes. They said, if you're putting these things towards the Supreme, then you're just putting your own ideas, your own human ideas on the Supreme. But one question that we were asking is, where do you see any relationship with something that's not a person? Because in any relationship we have, it's with persons. That's how we're able to speak. If I'm speaking, I usually speak to a person. I don't just speak to a brick wall or a stone. And in that way, there's a conversation. The person says something back. You can have loving exchanges, give gifts to a person, serve each other in some way. And so these are things that go on between two persons or two living beings, even an animal. Someone will serve an animal. And that animal we know is also a person. It's not its body. So there's relationships are going on between two living entities with personality. But this person wasn't understanding that. And he was saying that he has a relationship with everything. And he was pointing at the bacon in the Whole Foods. He's saying, just like this bacon, I can have a relationship. I can speak to the bacon. And I can share
you could speak to the bacon before he got slaughtered.
Yeah. Before he got slaughtered, he could have spoken to it. So he was saying he could share his emotions with the bacon. So it's a nice way of defeating this impersonalist philosophy is if we just ask them briefly to explain it, they reveal their craziness. And it's often very, very prominent. So like this, he started showing how he could speak to bacon, or explaining that he could speak to it and share his emotions with it. And he was also saying, I have a relationship, very nice relationship with nature. But if we understand the person behind nature, even if we're not jumping straight to the person who's behind everything, Krishna, but just the personality behind nature, like Bhumi, Mother Earth. If we understand that this is a person and what her likes and dislikes are, then that would be a satisfactory relationship. But with this impersonal idea, he's saying, I have a wonderful relationship with nature, but then he's going and purchasing some chicken. So how can you say you have a nice relationship with someone when you're, paying for their sons or their progeny to be killed, other living beings and animals? So that if we don't have a clear conception of who someone is, then we don't know what they like and don't like, and it's just an easy excuse to get around the idea of making any kind of adjustment in our activities. Because if we understand who Krishna is, then we know he has things that he likes and he dislikes. And just like any person, he has his desires and ideas, missions, and these things, and he gives them in scriptures. He comes every millennium to reestablish religious principles, so to explain to us how to come back to him, what he likes and doesn't like. And we can understand that we must be coming from a person, because even just this body that we have, if we look back, we come from some father. And if we ask our father, where does he come from? He comes from some person, his grandfather. And that grandfather comes from some person, our great-grandfather. So like this, we must, if we keep tracing it back, there's no reason that we shouldn't ultimately be coming from some great-great-great-great-grand person, because we see that we're all coming from some person. But Prabhupada makes the point here that when we say that he's a person, it doesn't just mean a limited like human being, a material person, but he's a spiritual person. All of his bodily organs and limbs can perform any of the functions of all of the other limbs. That's explained in the Brahma Samhita. We just sang it a minute ago in the morning. Angani yasya sakalendriya vritti manti pashyanti panti kalayanti chiram jaganti. So he has a fully blissful, spiritual, eternal form. So he explains in the Bhagavad Gita that he impregnates material nature simply by his glance. He can accept all sorts of offerings even with his glance or just by hearing the prayers of his devotees. So it's not that if someone wants to have children, they have to go through a whole process. It's a whole ordeal. But Krishna, just by his glance, impregnates the whole material nature with all living entities. So Krishna is a person, but he's a spiritual person. And people can have many misconceptions or create their own ideas of God. But Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that this impersonal path is very difficult. And he's speaking of the bona fide path of impersonalism. So what to speak of today when people are just mix matching ideas from, I heard this one YouTuber say this thing, I heard this so-called religionist say this thing, I just mix them all together. And then I come up with this strange philosophy that like, we are electricity and when I die, I'm going to become a planet. Like people, there's a whole mix mash of things. So Krishna says the impersonalist path is very difficult, but these so-called paths that people have today, it's not even difficult. It's just there's no hope of success if there's actually no bona fide information in somebody's philosophy. Like Maharaj was saying, someone needs to seek out a bona fide guru, a spiritual master who can teach them. And that spiritual master needs to be in a chain of bona fide teachers who are passing on the original knowledge coming from the Supreme Person as it is. So that's the qualification of a spiritual teacher, is they're saying what Krishna says without changing anything, without adding or subtracting anything. Then one can have real knowledge. But the ultimate way to sum up all of these kind of hodgepodge spiritualities that people come up with today is they're just cheating processes. So this is a characteristic of Kali Yuga. In Kali Yuga, which is the age of quarrel and hypocrisy, people will see truth as untruth and untruth as truth. So many things will be backwards. People in student life in Kali Yuga will be unclean. And we see that in today's day and age. If you go to a dormitory, they're the most dirtiest places on the face of the planet. Every surface is covered with trash. Every countertop, chair, floor, the mattress is in the middle of the room. The TV is like half cracked. There's intoxication paraphernalia. They're so dirty, it's horrible, and they smell. So these are characteristics of Kali Yuga. As Kali Yuga progresses, it's explained even the fruits on the trees, people will be smaller in size. The trees and plants will be smaller in size, and the fruits will just be skin and pit, no pulp or juice. So this is Kali Yuga. The governments, instead of protecting people like we were reading previously, Maharaj Parikshit, he was what a real government and a real king is supposed to be and has always been, meaning that he's upholding the laws of God. And so when any of the people in his state are in danger, he very strongly protects them and gets rid of all sorts of bad elements in his state very staunchly. There's no room for any kind of sinful activities and cheating in the state of a real government. But in Kali Yuga, the governments will just be composed of thieves and rogues who take all the money from the people. So we can already see this is the case as well. So similarly, in Kali Yuga, the religious processes will actually just be a kaitava dharma. Instead of real dharma, which means one's natural propensity, which is to serve God, there'll be kaitava dharma. There'll be cheating religions. So people will want to be cheated. They'll say, okay, I want to be so-called saintly or pious or a good person, but I don't want to change any of my ways or take on any sort of principles or values. So then these people who want to be cheated will go and find cheaters who are propounding so-called philosophies, saying, yes, you buy my mantra for $40 and then in 20 days you'll become God. Or follow this practice and you'll be pure. You'll feel the bliss and the bhakti. But the best thing is you don't have to follow any regulative principle. Just do whatever you want. So you can kill animals, have illicit sex, all this, but it's okay because you've got the bhakti, you've got the bliss. So like this, they're cheating processes. So that's more or less the impersonalism that we see today when we talk to people and they talk about, yes, I believe God is impersonal and it's a light and this and that. It's usually not so much the path of real impersonalism that's we hear often in the scriptures, which is like involves great austerities. They're going into seclusion, barely eating anything, doing all sorts of yogic practices, totally renouncing the material world, like 0 sense gratification. They're extremely austere. But that's usually not what people are talking about today when we hear about impersonalism. It's just some sort of concocted idea so I can continue enjoying my senses in any way that I want. So this impersonalism is easily defeated with scripture because we can see if we want to hear from some authority instead of some random guy on YouTube or some person who started some strange movement in a strange part of the world somewhere, we can just see what is actually in bona fide scriptures. So Brahma, he's the creator of the whole universe. And he says, Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchit Ananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karna Karanam. Krishna, who is known as Govinda, is the supreme Godhead. He has an eternal, blissful, spiritual body. He is the origin of all. He has no other origin, and he is the prime cause of all causes. So if someone has a body or a form, they must be a person. He has an eternal, blissful, spiritual body. So Krishna, if we have form, where are we getting that form? We see any cause, it has some symptoms of its effect. If something's coming from something, there's some similarities between the two. So if we're coming from somewhere and we have form, then where are we getting it from? The source that we're coming from must also have form. So to say that the Supreme is impersonal is just another way of trying to be God, because we're saying, actually, I'm in control, but the Supreme Being, he has no legs, no eyes, no mouth. He's dumb and deaf and blind. That's essentially what they're saying. So therefore, I can do whatever kind of nonsense I want, and there's no one superior to me, because the Supreme, he's just a light that sanctions out everything I do and says that it's nice. There was one time when one disciple of Srila Prabhupada, he woke up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, and he was walking past Prabhupada's room while Prabhupada was translating. And as I've heard this story, Prabhupada had called the devotee into the room, and this devotee's, he's tired, he's half asleep, and Prabhupada said, "Why aren't you doing what I'm doing?" And he said, "Oh, Prabhupada, I'm tired and I need some." Prabhupada said, "Why aren't you doing what I'm doing?" He said, "Well, it's late and I needed to." And then Prabhupada said it again, "Why aren't you doing what I'm doing?" And somehow Prabhupada had just found the right moment, right time, and what to say to really just poke this person in the right way and bring it out of him. And he just exploded and he said, "'Cause I'm envious of Krishna." So this is the actual position of the jiva soul in the material world. We come here because of enviousness of Krishna. He explains in the Bhagavad Gita that this whole world is like a perverted reflection of the material world. Of the spiritual world. So instead of being who we really are, which is an Jivara Srupahoy Krishnara Nityadas, an eternal servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. If we don't want to do that, we want to try to be the center, we want to try to be the Supreme, then Krishna, he's fully merciful, so he makes the perfect arrangement. We can come here to this material world where it's all flipped around. And instead of seeing that Krishna is in the center and let's serve him and we'll be eternally blissful in this way, we can have this perverted idea that actually I can be the Supreme. I can manipulate the world around me for my enjoyment and in this way become happy. But And we don't just have to accept these things on belief, but we can understand just practically when people, we're saying that there is God and that Krishna is God. And so someone might say, well, that's dogmatic to say that Krishna is God. But it's actually not dogmatic because we're saying Krishna is God. So if someone is claiming that he's not, then they would need to present, then who is God? So we're saying, here's Krishna. He's a beautiful blue cowherd boy with an eternal spiritual form full of bliss and knowledge. He's God. So if someone's saying he's not God, then who is God? But they can't show anyone that is God. And then they just say, there is no God. So just believe me. So that's actually dogmatic. That's what dogmatic means. Without any proof, you're making some claim. We're saying Krishna is God. All these great personalities have explained it, have realized it. It's shown in all the scriptures. He comes himself. Here's the place that he was. Here's different activities he did. You can go to the places in India, and he's God. So we're giving some proof. We're showing who he is, what he does. So that's actually just logical. But then to say that there's no God, and I can't prove it at all, and I won't show any other possibility, that's actually dogmatic. So the living entities, by disobeying the laws of God, they're getting punished by material nature and having to suffer so many different difficulties. And we can practically see that. So if someone goes against God's law, then the laws of nature will have their effect and make that person have to suffer more. But once we realize, I don't want to keep getting kicked around by material nature, I want to serve the person who's creating all of it, then there's no more difficulties and we can return to our eternal blissful position as an eternal servant of Krishna. Those are a few points. Is there any questions, comments? Yes, Bhakti.
So we were reading that Brahma is the Virat Rupa's genitals, and I was just wondering, like, why does it say that some demigods represent the Virat Rupa if the Virat Rupa is the source of all incarnations? Do you know what I'm trying to ask?
How is it that demigods represent or are in charge of like different parts of the
Yeah.
universe if it's the source of all?
Yeah, in charge of.
Well, Krishna is the source of all incarnations, and his universal form is showing how he can be seen in the whole universe. So the universe is in one sense a form of him, like it's his body. But there's different parts to it that the different demigods are presiding over. I don't really see the contradiction or just like our body has different parts of our body. It's explained in scriptures, even the smallest, minutest part. There's demigods are sanctioning how it will work and allowing it to work. They're like the higher authorities in the material world running everything. So, sorry, I don't understand. My bad. Would you clarify just a little bit? No, it's okay. Well, like you're saying, the Virat Rupa, it's Krishna's expansion. This material energy is coming from him. So his universal form, it's coming from him. And this is showing how he is ultimately the source of the whole universe. You can see these different parts like his body. So even the demigods, they're a part of that. So they're subordinate to him. They may be represented as like, I don't know, I can't think of it. Where's one part that we read? Brahma, who's generating everything, is his genitals. So like that, any part of the body, like the genitals on a human being, they're still subordinate to the actual person who's the whole human being. So Brahma would just be one part of the body of the Lord's universal form. Just like my hand, it's one part of my body, but it's subordinate to the whole thing. It has to serve the stomach in order to be satisfied and properly do its duty. So they're subordinate to him in that way. Okay, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.